When the project manager has completed a project, taken it to the final stage, has critiqued it on the way, has discussed all of the issues with the various stakeholders, management, managers, line personnel, customers, marketing department, engineering, and so on, all the people who are involved in the project. When the project manager has a coherent picture of how to present the project and how to lay out the project in a logical form, this culminates in the project presentation. Now, the project presentation could be to different levels of management, depends on who commissioned the project. And the idea behind the presentation is to give a clarity, a final clarity of the way in which the project can be delivered. So in this class we want to talk about some of the ideas that underline the presentation and what the presenter should watch out for. A completed project must be presented in an appropriate manner. By that it simply means that if the project is large and complex and perhaps involving a lot of resources, then a more elaborate presentation may be required with audio visuals and animations and simulations and so on. If it's a small project within a department, perhaps simply a meeting with departmental heads and some basic handouts and some explanations and discussion may represent the presentation. So it should be presented in an appropriate manner depending on who commissioned the project. Think about the type of stakeholder and the audience you will be delivering your project to. So if you are the person who will be doing this, then it's important just to consider the stakeholder, consider who commissioned the project, be it senior management, middle management, line management. Who was it who asked for this project in the first place? And consider what the resources are involved in the project and the changes that would be needed to implement the project, and then decide on the type of presentation that's most appropriate. So what's the most appropriate format to present your presentation, keeping in mind the intended audience? That's the point. Now, the most appropriate medium and method, well, what is it? As I said, it depends to some extent on the extent of the project. If it's a large, complex project, it may take more resources and more time to plan the presentation. If it's a small project, it could be done perhaps in a 1 hour meeting or an afternoon meeting. So it depends critically on who commissioned it, the scale of the project, and what medium is most appropriate for the audience that will be attending. So is it going to be written or verbal? That's the point. Or will it be both? It's not necessarily a dichotomy. It could be that it's written in terms of a report, and the meeting simply talks through the report, talks through the main points of the report and issues to watch out for. So is the project going to be short, a short presentation? Is it going to be multimedia? Is it going to be web-based? How will it be presented? And the selection here will have to be based on what the attendees will expect. What can they expect, and what will they be most happy with? Your medium and method will be influenced by the type of research and the intended audience. Now, the project layout and content. Well, a presentation should be visually appealing. Spend some time in making sure it's not just lots of words on a page. It should be illustrated. It should be laid out in a format that's easy to read and with no gimmicks. It's a straightforward presentation, but at the same time easy to read, well structured. Select appropriate backgrounds. Don't put in animated GIFs or cartoons, perhaps. May not be appropriate and may not be to everyone's sense of humour. So make sure that any illustrations out there are pertinent. They're related to the project and they're relevant. Their relevance illustrates some point. Use colours, but use them sparingly. Otherwise, they become like a school project, full of colours and full of different types of fonts. That is, generally speaking, not good practice. So use colours sparingly, but use them when required. Use different fonts and sizes, but again, be careful not to overdo the number of fonts or the number of sizes. There must be a consistency in the project. It must read and look professional. Appropriate pictures taken during the project, for example, and the execution phase, or undertaken research as evidence. So take pictures as the project was piloted, or when parts of it were being tested, or at different stages in the project. Take pictures to show where the project was at that stage and where it is now that it's complete. So the audience can see where they were and where they are. Use graphs and charts to display research findings. Try to use pictorial illustrations where possible. Presenting lots of raw data or data in numeric form is acceptable, but it's better if it's presented so that it's easily understood. The audience or the participants don't have to work to try to understand what the figures are saying. The work has been done for them. So make sure that the project has that. It may appear in the appendices. You might want to put in some appendices and say during the presentation that this is the finding and this was worked out using such a method, and that's illustrated in Appendix 4. So then we skip to Appendix 4, and there's the calculations and how the figures were derived. A presentation should follow an appropriate format, as I said. Introduction to the project. So the first couple of pages, or the first page, or even the first half page, should introduce the project. What's the project about? Why is it commissioned? Why is it there? What's it aiming to do? Brief statements, but setting out the project. Introduction to the project. Number 2, look at the scope and its purpose. Why is the project being undertaken? What's it meant to do? What's it going to do? What's its purpose? Why is the project in existence? Why was the project asked for in the first place? Look at the background information regarding the project and the company. In other words, consider carefully the underpinning for the project. What was the company doing before the project? What was the method before it? Or perhaps the project relates to an entirely new product, in which case the project is breaking new ground for the company, and therefore that should be explained. But look at the background information. What was there before the project? And why did the project come into existence? Why was it felt imperative that this project should be looked into? So go through parts of that. So that gives you the first 3 parts of the project. The fourth part, apply relevant theory and concepts. Now, in business, often this is not explicitly stated like this, but sometimes it's wise to appeal to higher thinking, almost to models which are widely understood and acceptable. Look at models and theories that have been around within the subject area, that have been studied, have been talked about, and which many of the participants will be familiar with. Look at those ideas and talk about their relevance and how the project draws on them or fits together with them or uses them in some way. So look at theories and concepts by all means. A small section in the project dedicated to those gives it more weight. It's not just speculations here on the part of the writer. This is grounded. It's grounded in ideas that were around before this. The fifth idea, the fifth part of the layout, well, key objectives and hypotheses. So what are you investing? Well, first of all, what are you testing? What are you trying to do? What are the key objectives of the project? What's the project all about? State them. 1, 2, 3. This project is attempting to do something, and it's also attempting to do something else, and just state them. 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it is. And look at the hypothesis. If the company does this, the hypothesis is that it will save considerable sums on distribution or on production or whatever, or it'll extend the market. That's the hypothesis. The hypothesis is the speculation that's being tested. In a sense, the hypothesis is the rationale for the project itself. The project was brought into existence to make improvements, presumably, in terms of cost savings or market penetration or extending the market, or it was brought into existence for some purpose, and that's what's being tested. We call it the hypothesis in this case. Research approach used during the project execution. Well, as the project goes through, it may be that it has to conduct some research, perhaps research into customer attitudes or into suppliers and in their ability to supply certain items and frequency of delivery, and so there has to be some sort of research conducted. And what is the methodology for that research? How is the research conducted? How not just the project conducted research into something and then doesn't explain it. There has to be some explanation as to how the research was conducted, because the research may be biased, it may be wrong, it may lead to erroneous conclusions, it may mislead the project, and hence may mislead those who commissioned the project into making bad decisions. So what is the research? Now again, it may be that this is simply stated in the project and there is a fuller elaboration of this in one of the appendices. So in the main project it says this work is based on participant observation. Well, what is participant observation? I explained that in one of the appendices. Appendix 6 explains whatever. Now it's covered. So the main project is straightforward and easy to follow, but it's all backed up and it's all supported by the appendices. Now, how was the project conducted? Number 7. In other words, how did the person designing the project, how did they set it up? How did they go about doing the project? What was the methodology of the project? So how, in practice, the person who was commissioned to undertake this project, how did that person set it up? Start from part 1 to part 2, part 3. What are the branches? What's the feedback? What revisions were made? What discussions were undertaken? What refinements? What parts were cut out or jettisoned because they were no longer appropriate, what parts were introduced, new thinking, what was the consultative process, who were the personnel, and so on. So how was the project conducted? Again, it's important that the readers can see this, because they need to have confidence in the project, and they need to know how it was conducted to make sure that it was complete and comprehensive in its coverage. Number 8, well, the analysis and results. Again, using perhaps graphs or charts, or using some visual display. But it's important that the data collected during the testing period and during the whole project, as the data was coming back, that's collated, it's analysed, and the results are presented. And that should be free from bias. It should be free from the project manager's feelings about the project, or it should not be swayed in any way by discussions with other managers or other interested stakeholders. It should be as found. Nine would be the research findings themselves. This would be the overall output from the project. What did the project find? Was it a success? Is it worthwhile pursuing, or should it be put aside for the moment, or should it be just simply rejected? And again, the evidence for this should be presented and supported in one of the appendices. Look at the reliability and validity of the research as well. Are the findings reliable? Perhaps the sample upon which the questionnaire was based was too small. Perhaps the sample was biased. So there are issues about reliability and validity. Are the findings valid? Or would a different technique have yielded different results? There will be separate videos on reliability and validity that you should watch, and these are available for you to consult. But that's an issue as well. And then we have the recommendations, which should be based on the findings. It would be incongruous if the recommendations were contrary to the findings. But the recommendations should be based on the findings. If the findings felt that or illustrated that the project was a good idea, then clearly the recommendations should be that the project should be pursued. There should be a consistency between recommendations and the findings. The conclusion, perhaps a short statement about looking at the recommendations, looking at the findings, looking at any issues, and it's also an opportunity to put in any reservations, just in case in the discussions of the findings and the recommendations that any issues that were a worry, or any issues that perhaps could pose a problem in the future, were played down. If that's the case, they should get a mention in the conclusions again, just to make the reader aware that there are issues that perhaps could militate against a successful outcome for the project. So even though the recommendations and the findings are positive, there could be some issues that still may be worth mentioning in the conclusions. Look at any references used, academic references, previous projects or reports within the business, Chamber of Commerce research, findings from financial journals or financial press, or whatever it is, technical reports. So itemize them and make sure that they're available for the participants to consult if need be. Any appendices, and I mentioned as we read through this, that the use of appendices is very important because it takes away a lot of the material from the main body, makes the main body of the report easier to read, but at the same time produces the material that those who are more inquisitive would want to go to the appendix and read it up in the appendix what certain points are, or what the research method was, or what issues were encountered and how they were solved, and so on. So it takes away a lot of the material, puts it into the appendices, which are in a sense optional reading, because the main report covers all of the big issues. Now, the convincing argument. Well, projects should be presented logically, follow a pattern, and in sequence. It almost goes without saying they should be logical. There should be a coherence in the arguments put forward. They should follow A, B, C, D, and so on. It shouldn't jump from A to D back to B down to G. There should be a structure which is logical. It follows. The points are linked, and the reader can see how one part depends on the previous part and how it provides a platform for the next part. So there is a coherence, a logic in the way it's presented. There is a pattern and a sequence to follow. Projects should be convincing. For example, findings and outcomes should be appropriate for the research intent. But as I said, the findings should be based on dispassionate research, in the sense that the research should be based on its own logic. It should be free from bias. It should have enough participants and enough data points to give it validity. So it's a valid exercise. It shows something, a real insight into a certain situation. And if the research is done properly, it's convincing. Avoid distractions. Your presentation should only focus on the project and relevant information you want to communicate to the audience. Don't get sidetracked. Don't drift off and discuss something peripheral. It's going to be a distraction. It's going to confuse the reader. Make sure that the writing is focused. It's focused on what you are doing, very precisely on what you're doing, what you were commissioned to do as perhaps a project manager. You were commissioned to undertake a certain project. Just focus in on that. Don't get sidetracked into some potential new development that will come out in a few years' time. That's an irrelevance. So avoid distractions. The conclusion, well, it should be evaluated and draw on the project and its outcomes. Avoid generalizations. Don't say in all cases, because the project has only looked at one set of circumstances. And because it works under one set of circumstances doesn't mean it will work under all circumstances. So the project should be evaluated critically. In other words, it presents its findings. It also mentions any issues with the findings which could detract from the potency of the conclusion. So any issues which have been discovered which would militate against adopting the project should be stated in the conclusion. But it should be logical, it should be based on the findings, it should be focused on the findings, and it should be critical. Not overly critical in the sense of perhaps trying to wreck the project. That's not what's meant by critical. What's meant by critical is that it talks or discusses the shortcomings of the research itself. Were there enough interviews conducted? Were they relevant? Were there any distractions during the interviews? Did issues happen during the project which may have influenced the outcome of the project? Look at those sort of topics. Recommendations. Well, the recommendations should support the overall research findings, as I said earlier. It would be incongruous if they didn't. If the recommendations opposed the findings, that would be strange. So the recommendations should support the findings and give reasons why the findings should be implemented or should be considered. The project should be communicated assuming the audience has little or no knowledge of the project. So assume that the audience perhaps are not completely familiar with the project. So they're being taken through it as if they're being taken through it for the first time. They may not be. Some of them may be quite expert, in which case a little disclaimer to that fact. Just excuse the way it's presented. Say it's done very gently and straightforward, because you want to make sure there is a comprehensive coverage of the project. So all the steps are considered, and that will help people in the room who perhaps may not have expert knowledge of this area, but they're able to follow precisely what is happening because of the way the presentation is conducted. Analysis and evaluation. Well, the extent the project objectives have been achieved and their success. So look at the projects and look at the objectives and look at the way the objectives have been met, perhaps, or have not been met. Talk about the success where they have been achieved, and look at the issues that perhaps have acted as barriers to the achievement of some objectives. So be very honest and very open about the achievement of the objectives. And look at the project's overall sets of objectives and see if that was reasonable from the outset. Was it the project too big? Was it trying to achieve too much? Or was it well balanced? Was it reasonable? Given the timescale and the resources that were put into the project, was it a reasonable exercise? What was achieved, and what successes came out of the exercise, and also what questions came out of the exercise that might want to be considered in the future also. The reliability and validity of research methods used, both the primary and the secondary. Primary research and secondary research. As I said, this is the subject matter of separate videos, so I'll ask you to consult those separately. It's an important topic and quite a big topic. Essentially, for our purposes here, it simply means where the outcomes biased, where they invalid because perhaps there was not enough data to justify the outcomes, to justify the statements. Were the techniques used appropriate? They may not have been. Perhaps different techniques should have been used, different perhaps statistical techniques, or a different approach adopted. But as I said, this is the subject matter of separate videos, so I'd ask you to look at those separately. Finally, analysis forms the basis of your evaluation. Be critical and justify your judgments and recommendations. But good projects are based on analysis. They're not based on speculation or on supposition or on unsupported hypotheses. They are based on analysis. They're based on ideas, if you like, theories, hypotheses, but they're based on data being analysed in conjunction with those hypotheses or those speculations, and then in a very honest fashion, either the data through the analysis supports the hypothesis or rejects it. In either case, honesty prevails, and that should be reported. So these are some of the ideas that need to be borne in mind when looking at a project presentation. And that's all we're going to deal with in this session. So let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.